I'm Lou, but I don't mind what you call me. I'm Louis Potter, married to Ruby for 4 years now. We haven't had kids yet because we value our freedom a bit too much. Maybe we'll change our minds, but probably not until we're well into our 30s. We both grew up in poor families, just a few streets apart, but we didn't meet until we were 18 at a college recruitment event. Ruby excelled in college and became an accountant and credit controller. Meanwhile, I struggled academically and didn't even graduate. I've always had a strong work ethic and a talent for business. By the time I was 15, I was already working as a cleaner in local stores and offices. By 18, I was managing 30 employees and had contracts with several big companies in town. Ruby was job hunting and I needed more staff. When she approached my table at the event, she handed me her resume and said, "I'm not looking for a cleaning job, but maybe you'd like my phone number." I called her before she even reached the next table and asked her out to dinner the next evening. For years later, we got married. At the event, Ruby got a job in the purchasing department of an engineering firm, starting from the bottom. After 8 years, she became head of both the purchasing and credit control departments. As a result, we enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle on dual incomes without children. Meanwhile, my business grew and became the city's largest office and store cleaning company after acquiring 2 competitors. People who work in cleaning and security often notice unusual occurrences in offices, which leads to conversations among staff. 4 months ago, my secretary told me there was a man waiting to see me in the reception area. She gave me his business card, which read Ross Evans, private detective. I told her to bring him in when he arrived. I greeted Mr. Evans, shook his hand, and asked what he wanted. After exchanging pleasantries, he sat down and smiled. Before we started, I asked if I could get some coffee. I hadn't had any all day, and I was really thirsty. He said he wanted some, and I agreed. I thought caffeine was a lifeline for most business people. Ross, my secretary, didn't need a second invitation. She fetched 2 mugs from the office coffee machine with milk and sugar already on the table, but neither of us reached for them after some initial chit-chat. I steered the conversation to the matter at hand. "So Ross, how can I help you efficiently?" He wasted no time getting to the point. "Please just call me Ross. As you can see from my card, I'm a private investigator working for a client whose wife may be having an affair or is on the brink of one. Our client's wife he's an accountant at Stevens Piping, which is one of its main suppliers. Recently, AM Metals hired a new salesman, Alastair Clark. He's known for pursuing married women. My client's wife has been receiving flowers and gifts from him, and he's been calling her late at night. He's been texting nonstop, which is pretty typical, but now he's pushing for an overnight run. We've gathered quite a bit of information, but we need to fill in the final gaps." I found myself intrigued. The whole spy scenario is pretty amusing, but the name AM Metals rings a bell. Bell Ruby's company also sources materials from them, and this Clark character sounds like someone I'd rather keep Ruby away from. I glanced up and caught Ross looking at me, evidently awaiting a response, so I asked, "I get the gist, but how can I assist?" "I was hoping you'd ask. It's simple. Clark leaves flowers, notes, and other items on her desk. She reads them and tosses them in the trash. Your staff handles the trash. They can collect anything personal from him and pass it on to us. We'll vet it through our legal team. It's all good, no legal issues with the personal items. We've got the green light from her employer. Here's the go-ahead to gather info by working with them. They're avoiding any legal trouble from violating her contracts or fraternization clause. If you're wondering why they agreed, here's the CEO's card. Give him a call to confirm the CEO's number was already in my phone." Without a word to Ross, I dialed and he picked up on the second ring. He said, "Lou, I understand Ross Evans is with you. I authorize you to receive and transmit any non-dash. I'll pass on any company-related information to him or his team. Our lawyer is drafting a formal letter, which I'll email you. I've got to go. He's waiting in my office, but give me a shout if you need anything else." They wanted this sorted ASAP. Ross smiled at me. I just nodded and said he'd confirmed what you said. Give me all the details, and we'll start collecting her trash in a separate bag. I'll sort through it here, and you can pick it up every morning at 11. Ross said that would work for him, and it was perfect. I then called the crew leader and Ross told us what to look for: early lunches, late lunches, flowers, notes, and so on. We worked with Ross for about 6 weeks, and at the end he said the investigation was over. One of my employees noticed that the subject didn't come back after lunch. We gave Ross a heads up that he'd followed them to a motel. After that, work and family life went back to normal until one day Ruby seemed a bit troubled. I tried to ask her about it, but she didn't say anything for about a week. Then Donna, who'd been with me since the beginning, came into my office. Donna was a valued employee. One of my employees, Donna, is 25 years my senior. She treated me like a son and settled into a chair. I sensed something was up when she began remembering a few months back when we were involved in that surveillance at the office. My interest was piqued. I responded, "How could I forget? It was quite an intriguing time." "Why do you bring it up?" I raised an eyebrow. I was really curious, so I asked her to tell me more. "As you know, I now work in the same office as your wife, and the man we were monitoring is now visiting her at work. I noticed a big bunch of flowers, and she took them with her to lunch. Here's the card that came with them." She gave me the card and I read it. "Dear Ruby, thank you for helping me renew my contract. I'm really grateful to you for your help, Alistair. I hope you'll join me for lunch so we can catch up." I saw that the card said love, and it made me think that this wasn't their first meeting and that they were getting close to crossing marital boundaries. Ross said that this person was persistent, and he'd been successful in pursuing married women. My wife was now a target. I thanked Donna and asked her to keep a close watch and provide me with daily updates if any further notes surfaced. I asked her to bring them to me immediately upon discovery. I picked up the phone and dialed Ross's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Hello, Lou. How can I help?" I didn't waste any time telling you what Donna said. "One of the staffers just told me that she used to do the nightly cleanup during your investigation. Once it was over, we moved her to my wife's office. Donna also told me that the same Mr. Clark is now trying to get close to my wife, even taking her out to lunch. I've got a card with flowers from him, which shows he's interested." "Ross," I took a deep breath. "Our investigation into Mr. Clark is still ongoing. You're actually the third husband involved at the moment. The difference is that the other two didn't know who he was at the start. They've agreed to share expenses. Would you like to join them?" I said straight away, "Absolutely." "What's the next step?" Ross suggested meeting with the other husbands at 2 p.m., suggested that I pop by his office to meet him, fill out some forms, and exchange information. I said I'd be there at 1:55 p.m. In Ross's office, I found Dan McWilliams, Johnny Ashley, and Ross and his colleague Mike Pearson, who was gathering data on the case. Ross started the meeting by saying, "Gentlemen, we're here because you three share a common predicament. Dan, Johnny, meet Lou. He's interested in joining your investigation. If you're amenable, we'll register him as a client and facilitate information exchange." They glanced at me, then at Ross, and responded, "Yes, that sounds good." The paperwork took about 15 minutes. After that, I used my personal credit card to front the $5. Ross said that he'd made a mistake and that he'd made a payment of $5,000 to Ruby, but that she hadn't received a statement for this transaction. He then proceeded to tell Dan, Johnny, and me about our shared issue, which revolves around Mr. Alistair Clark. He also told us that Dan's wife works alongside Mr. Clark at AM Metals, while Johnny's wife is employed by the school board, which sources metals for tech classes in schools. He then told us that Mr. Clark follows a well-rehearsed routine. He's got a routine he sticks to. He pursues women at work with flowers, messages, lunches, and often tries to lure them to a motel after lunch. He uses the same tactics with married women, pressuring those with children into infidelity and coercing childless women to ask their husbands for free passes. It seems like he gets a kick out of husbands finding out he's got their wives' attention. He plans weekend trips, but then leaves them stranded later. Over the past year, we've seen at least 5 divorces in our area that he's caused. We did some digging and found out he used to work somewhere else. In Dallas, he was fired after being sued by 7 husbands in a class action lawsuit that lasted 3 years for alienation of affection. This man is despicable. Ross took another sip of coffee. Lou, are you assigned to clean the AM Metals or the school district office, as per our last conversation? Just to check, you can use the contents of your wife's bin unless there's a confidentiality agreement in your contract with the company you're cleaning for. I said no, we aren't. Ross acknowledged that's unfortunate, but continue gathering garbage from your wife's bin. Who covers your? I replied that I didn't have a wife. Ross grinned and asked for her phone number. I told him. He said, "Great. Please complete this form granting us permission to retrieve data from her phone." He then handed me a paper with a QR code and said, "Scan this code on her phone. It'll direct you to our server. Use the provided username and password." He said we'd need a username and password, and a program would be installed on her device, transmitting all calls, messages, emails, and WhatsApp chats to us. We're aware he typically uses a mobile phone to avoid accidental answers from spouses on home lines. At the end of the meeting, Dan, Johnny, and I swapped phone numbers and set up a WhatsApp group, including Ross and Mike are going to make it easier for us to share information. When I got back home, Ruby was already there. She seemed preoccupied, holding her phone close to her and acting distant during our conversation. She left to feed the dog, which is unusual because she usually keeps her phone with her. When I asked her about her day, she said she felt tired after an odd day and went to bed at 9. I stayed awake until our usual bedtime, then looked for her phone. It wasn't in its usual spot, so I went to our bedroom. I saw a telephone cord near the bed and, when I looked closer, found it under her pillow. I couldn't get it without waking her, so I went to bed, feeling troubled. Luckily, she got up in the middle of the night, which gave me a chance to quickly scan the QR code, enter the details, and return her phone without her noticing. Before she left for work the next morning, she wandered aimlessly around the house. If I hadn't engaged with her, she wouldn't have said anything until around 11:30 a.m. Mike called from Ross's office. They'd finished looking over the first set of data, and he started to explain what had happened. She'd set up a new email account just for him. This helped us with our investigation, but we didn't know he was using this email. We're now trying to hack into it. His messages are very persuasive. He's trying to get her to say that you were her first and only, and that she needs to try new things to make the marriage better. She said that she loved him. He's got his hands on some of your personal details and is using them to his advantage. He hinted at spicing up your love life and probably proposed a weekend getaway during their lunch. Now he's saying it's just physical and that if she truly loves you, it's not cheating. He's trying to manipulate her by making her feel guilty. I spoke to her last night and she seemed totally consumed by these thoughts. She didn't even acknowledge my presence last night or this morning. I asked if they were still in touch or planning another lunch. Mike looked over the messages and told me the latest one he'd just received. It said, "Let's meet for lunch at the beach club tomorrow and strategize. Lou loves you. If you tell him, it won't be considered cheating and he can't deny you a free pass." Her response was simply, "Okay." After finishing my discussion with Mike, I sat back and thought about what I should do next. Talking to her directly won't be enough. He'll keep going, maybe even resorting to. I've decided to end this. I have to put an end to this or to our marriage. I called Ross to chat, but I got straight to the point. It seems he's making a direct move on Ruby and flaunting it in my face. Even if I intervene, he'll find another tactic. Maybe he'll arrange a motel trip. I need a plan to nip this in the bud. I'm considering filing for divorce. I also think I need a backup plan, but I haven't figured out what it entails yet. What do you think? After a brief pause, Ross responded, "It's good to have a backup plan, but if it fails, he won't back down. I know this type." His ego won't let her slip away, so if forgiveness isn't an option, divorce may be inevitable. I'll prepare a packet of documents for your attorney at some point, or I can recommend mine. I have my own. Thanks. I confirmed he drafted a business agreement protected by a trust in case of divorce. I contacted my lawyer and scheduled a meeting for the next day at 9:30. When he got to the office in the morning, he looked at me and said, "Who changed it?" I laughed. He knew me too well. I took a cup of coffee from his secretary. I told him, Ruby is on the verge of betraying me. A salesman at her workplace has set his sights on her. She's taken the bait, and I see no other recourse. I'm devising a backup plan to halt everything, but if she cheats, plan A goes out the window. We spent the next hour talking about it. I considered a few options. I thought a straightforward divorce would be best. We could divide our business evenly, and there were no children, so there'd be no child support. We could sell the house. I wasn't planning to take legal action against Clark, her employer, or her employer. It'd be too expensive and probably wouldn't work. We signed our agreement with a handshake after settling the fee. He said he'd finalize everything. Documents and storing them in the archives for future reference. Ruby's mood changed a lot throughout the week. One evening she was affectionate, while the next she barely acknowledged he was there. On Friday afternoon, Donna called to say that Ruby had received a big bouquet of flowers and a card that seemed to settle things between them. He asked for my opinion while writing a message in the WhatsApp group. I saw a post from Ross to Dan inviting we were aware of his intentions, yet the matter remained unresolved. I encouraged Dan to join me, hopeful that he would achieve his objective soon. I was so preoccupied that I kept dropping things. I messaged the group to inform Mike about the flowers and the message on the card. His response was prompt. I'll check her email now. Nothing so far. 5 minutes later. My phone rang, and without hanging up, Mike told me to check my WhatsApp. When I opened the app, I found a document he'd sent. It was a hotel confirmation for a spot by the lake, about 30 meters from the city. The booking was for a double room for the upcoming Friday and Saturday. There were 2 names on the booking, Clark and Ruby. I told Mike the bad news. He sighed and said yes, but the email was even worse. He then described the contents as a guide for cheating written by Ruby. It explains what to say and do. He promised to forward it to me as the email arrived in my inbox. I read through a series of messages with the subject line, "Weekend it all began." This was around 2 weeks ago when he sent her a link to the same hotel he eventually booked. In these exchanges, he expressed his desire to pamper her and suggested various forms of entertainment. Subsequent emails questioned her thoughts. In the final message, he outlined the reservation details and provided a script of what to say and do to persuade me. It was essentially a manual for infidelity, advising her to cook a lavish dinner the following Thursday, engage in frequent closeness throughout the week, and assert that it would be purely physical with him, yet enriching. He appealed to her love for him. It was up to her to decide. I needed time to think about what I was going to do. The weekend was busy, and I couldn't tell her what I knew. She was very kind, though. We had sex on Friday night, Saturday morning, and Saturday night, and then on Sunday she asked me out again. We had another encounter on Sunday afternoon, and then on Monday morning she asked me to meet her for a quickie. Ross called at 3. On Monday, Ross called to give me an update on the email. He said the situation was pretty bad. Ross also messaged Clark on Thursday night. She said she'd understand if he didn't go ahead with it, but if he did, she'd be grateful. Ross also said that if Clark was feeling anxious, he should remember that seeking forgiveness is often easier than seeking permission. I thanked Ross and asked him to put together a folder with all the relevant documents. Ross asked if there were any photos of us having sex. I said there were. I could hear the shuffling of papers as Ross confirmed he had a photo. It shows them kissing, but not in a passionate way. I told him to put everything in the folder with the photo on the front and send it all to my lawyer. He said he'd do it. Then I called my lawyer to tell him about the folder. I've arranged for it to be presented at the hotel on Saturday morning over breakfast. I told my lawyer that a divorce petition on Monday night is one of the most stressful things you can experience. She wanted to be close to me, but I told her I had to get something done. I stayed in my office until 2 a.m. midnight. Morning. I found her already asleep despite the late hour, so I got some sleep. I woke up at 6. I left for work at 6 o'clock, just before she could make advances. A courier delivered the folder I was waiting for, which was sitting in my office. I looked through it and saw that it had a seductive undertone. She had an unpredictable yet effective allure. Ross gave me accounts, but he didn't give me names, of at least 7 marriages he had dismantled. In the past 18 months, there was also a note from Dan about an upsetting incident at the Holiday Inn involving his wife, Clark, and himself. Dan's wife ran away in tears, so Ross helped Dan get home. The couple started counseling to try to save their marriage, especially since they have 3 young children. The interim solution gave them a bit of breathing room, especially since Dan's wife had resigned and left Clark unemployed. As I read through the file, my secretary looked at me with a steady gaze, clearly moved by what she was seeing. When I finished, she asked about my plans for the first time. I smiled, realizing she was more than just my secretary. She was a friend who was there for me. I noticed something else about her too. She was really attractive. I smiled back, and I told her to get ready for divorce. If she leaves with him on Friday, she'll file at the hotel. On Saturday, I've been trying to come up with a plan B to stop her, but I'm not getting any ideas. My secretary, who I formally addressed as Miss Atwood but who preferred Kathy, grinned mischievously and quoted, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander." She suggested, "Why not have your own weekend with your dream girl?" I couldn't help but smile back and ask, "Who might that be?" though I already knew the answer. She replied, "Your loyal secretary is urging you to clear your mind. It's strictly about physical release, unrelated to your marriage. Use this letter as a guide and send it to her before she does the same to you." The plan is simple yet effective. It was simple yet effective. I made sure to face my betrayal by Tuesday night. I made love to my wife on Tuesday night, but it was devoid of emotion. It was tough to do. Wednesday morning, neither of us desired a quick encounter. By Wednesday evening, tensions eased slightly, but only slightly. Thursday morning, as I left the house, Ruby awoke shouting about dinner. I ignored her around noon. Then Ross called to say that Ruby had messaged Clark, boasting about preparing a lavish dinner for me and promising to update him on our conversation to preempt her. I went to the store and bought chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, all intended for baking, along with a bottle of her favorite white wine. By 3 p.m., I was back home and everything was ready to go in the oven. Just as I was putting the potatoes in, Ruby arrived with shopping bags. She looked puzzled and asked, "What are you up to?" I grinned. "I'm just preparing dinner for my dear wife. I wanted to make it special before we sit down for a chat." She looked perplexed and responded, "Oh, I was going to cook dinner too, but after we eat. I have something important to discuss, so it's going to be a long night." I replied, turning away with a smile. I had already made a significant contribution to her plans. I'd already put a folder with a letter outlining her excuses on the kitchen table, hidden under a couple of magazines. Now I took the magazines off, leaving the letter on the table. "Ruby, you know I love you and I'd never hurt you." I started, "But we got married young and I've realized lately that I don't have much experience. My new secretary, Miss Atwood, or Kathy as she likes to be called, has been telling me her stories and they're really interesting. I could listen to them for hours. I've got to get her out of my mind before we commit to spending our lives together. I've arranged a hotel stay with her for the weekend. It'll be purely physical. It'll give me a chance to blow off steam and pick up some new techniques to try out with you later. It doesn't affect my love for you or our marriage. I'm telling you beforehand so it won't be seen as betrayal. I trust your love for me enough to allow me this one weekend outside of our marriage." I told her about the marriage, and she said it would have no impact on us. Her face turned red and she said, "Over my dead body." She wants this woman gone by Monday morning or we're finished. I laughed at her reaction, and she seemed to relax a bit. Then she realized I'd already anticipated every response she was going to give me. I closed the folder and handed it to her, revealing a photo of her kissing Clark on the cover. Her complexion turned ashen as she whispered, "You knew and you played me." I smiled and said, "Yes, I did." Your reaction is exactly what mine would have been if roles were reversed. Unlike you, I didn't book a hotel for us. Unlike you, Miss Atwood, and I never shared lunches, kisses, or conversations about love or closeness. My tale was purely fictional. Yours, however, is quite real. As I spoke, she flipped through the folder, realizing the extent of my knowledge. She was furious. "You followed me, you violated my privacy, how could you?" I remained calm. That's all there is to it. Time to take action or not. I love you, but you need to understand there's a boundary and you're teetering on it. You got yourself a boyfriend, engaged in an emotional affair, and planned to make it physical. You've humiliated me and jeopardized our marriage. I'm trying to help, but you're angry at me for it. I thought we could work through this, but maybe I'm mistaken. I responded more sorrowfully than angrily. What do you mean by humiliating you and wrecking our marriage? I never intended anything like that. It was separate from our marriage. She replied, "See from the infidelity playbook. Why should this affect us?" I echoed her words and then pointed out that you responded to. She gave me this look like I said the same thing as over my dead body. So why is it okay for you to cheat but not for me? I raised my hand to interject. There's no such thing as a free pass. If you go with Clark, it's cheating, even if you tell me beforehand. It won't change the situation. She averted her gaze and murmured, "I can't process this right now. I need to be alone." With those words, she got up and left. I heard the bedroom door shut and the lock engage as she took the folder upstairs. I tidied up and sat down at the table. Ross had provided me with a tablet to access a server displaying all of Ruby's phone activity. I logged in and found her initial letter intriguing. She expressed concern about someone trailing them and having copies of their exchanges when she got home. Her partner had dinner ready and seemed to know what she was thinking, which made her angry later on. She showed me a folder with all the details, including the reservation. I wasn't sure what to do. Clark didn't see it as a problem. He said to tell the other person that everything was booked and that they had to follow through, to show how much they love each other and to ask the other person how they felt. He seemed desperate, trying to follow his advice. I ran into some resistance from my partner, who argued that it would embarrass him and put our marriage at risk. He even said that seeking his permission would be considered cheating. Despite the potential enjoyment of the weekend, I couldn't proceed. I couldn't risk my future with Lou, seeing his disappointment. I realized all his efforts and resources had been wasted, and he decided to take a significant risk. She was asked if she thought her husband would divorce her. She replied negatively, expressing doubt that he would find another woman like her. The suggestion was made for her to pack her bag and bring it to work to gauge his reaction. If that failed, they would proceed with the weekend plan, followed by seeking forgiveness on Sunday. Despite recognizing the nonsense she fell for, she concluded that she wouldn't proceed. She was asked if she thought her husband would divorce her. She replied negatively, expressing doubt that he would find another woman like her. The suggestion was made for her to pack her bag and bring it to work to gauge his reaction. If that failed, they would proceed with the weekend plan, followed by seeking forgiveness on Sunday. Despite recognizing the nonsense she fell for the suggestion, she concluded that if it seemed like her husband might leave her, she wouldn't proceed with it. The plan was to see the person the next day. She started thinking more rationally and realized he knew how to reassure her. She put away the tablet and started watching TV, though her mind was still preoccupied with everything. The decision was made to file for divorce on Saturday, though there was some thought about postponing it. However, once initiated, there would be no turning back. The decision was made to proceed with the filing the next day with the intention to show I was serious. I called my lawyer and told him everything in detail. I told her I'd forgiven her, and Clark said she was planning to pack her bag to see how I'd react. I don't want to file for divorce until they've slept together. Is there any way we can show how serious this is to her? My lawyer was sharp. He suggested we could give her a letter with a preliminary. We could say that we know she's planning to have an affair over the weekend and that we'll start divorce proceedings on Saturday morning at the hotel. I thought about adding a bit more to the letter and giving it to her at her office, with Clark there too. What do you think it'll prove that I'm serious? She said Clark would pick her up for lunch, so I suggested giving her the letter around 11:00. Even if he's there, her boss will understand what's going on. He's traditional and won't be happy about her actions, but what would really upset him is if a process server showed up and caused a scene about an hour later. The lawyer sent me a draft of the letter that was perfect for the situation. It had all the important details and made it clear that she would be served on Saturday morning. I sent a reply to say I approved of the plan. I checked my tablet, but there were no more messages between Ruby and Clark, so I went to bed. I tried to open the bedroom door, thinking it would be locked, but it was unlocked. When I went in, I saw Ruby lying in bed, as if she was expecting a romantic encounter. Her bag was against the wall on her side of the bed, catching my eye. I noticed her decision and commented that she seemed to have chosen a quick rendezvous with Clark over our marriage. Without waiting for a response, I left the room and headed towards the guest room. Despite her pleas, I remained silent, lying on the bed fully clothed. I realized the letters were the work of someone else and not a true reflection of reality. However, seeing her bag packed for a rendezvous with another man, I felt betrayed. A meeting with another man caused strong emotions and a sense of betrayal. I was overwhelmed by grief and a profound sense of loss, and tears streamed down my face throughout the night. The following morning, I heard Ruby descending the stairs. I retreated into our bedroom to shower and change clothes, only to realize my bag was no longer there. I wondered if she had taken it downstairs, unpacked it, and stowed it away after. I took a shower and caught a whiff of coffee and bacon. I figured the bag was downstairs, so I went into the kitchen. She was looking nervous, so I gave her a reassuring look. I told her not to hold back. This fancy spread is probably an attempt to show you'll be a great wife if you sleep with another man. But it won't change my mind. If you go through with this, it's over. The lawyer and I agreed that the divorce papers would be presented to you tomorrow morning at breakfast. Once they're delivered, there'll be no going back. There won't be forgiveness if you return home tonight. We'll start counseling to rebuild trust and prevent a recurrence. If you leave with him, don't even think about coming back. You're not welcome here. I turned to leave. She led me to believe that we should stay for breakfast and discuss things further. I replied that we'd already had that discussion and that her packed bag suggested she was looking for persuasion, not dialogue. I also said that I wouldn't be having breakfast there and that she needed to learn to fend for herself if she wanted to. I assumed her bag was already in her car. She turned away, confirming my suspicions, and left the house in silence. At least she grasped the gravity of the situation. When she got to the office, Katie said, "You look terrible." I smiled and said, "You look as stunning as ever." She could have asked more, but I didn't know how it went. When I gave her plan B, she got really angry. She said she wanted to fire you and even said, "Only if I'm dead." Then she did her own thing this morning. I packed my bag at 11. At 10 o'clock, she'll get a letter from me with a directive. Let's see if this rattles her. As I spoke, Katie made coffee and handed me a cup. She said, "I hope she comes to her senses. Surely she can't think this behavior is acceptable for her, but not for you." I gave her a sad smile and sat down at the table. The day was unproductive. After 11, I gave Ruby a call. She was in tears. She said, "Are you serious? Are you really going to divorce me?" It seemed like she'd convinced herself I wouldn't follow through without hesitation. I replied, "If you betray me, it's a breach of our agreement. We both know it. You divorce me if I cheat." She didn't answer much. She said yes, but it was a firm no. She coughed and asked if I would come home to talk. I said I would be there in 20 minutes. I arrived home first, brewing coffee. The aroma of the bacon she had cooked earlier lingered in the air, so I opened the kitchen window before sitting down to eat. She arrived at the house 10 minutes later. I was already pouring coffee when she came in, holding an envelope from the lawyer and her weekend bag over her shoulder. She dropped her bag at the door and stood there, looking unsure. I could tell she wanted to come over and give me a hug, but she was holding back. I went over and got her a coffee, and then I invited her to sit down. Her first question was pretty straightforward. So, are you still planning to go to the hotel? How can you even ask that after sending this? She replied, of course I'm not going. I love you. I want to be with you. I know you'd never allow it, so everything is canceled now. Do we need to mend our marriage or will I still be served? I reached across the table and lifted her chin to meet my eyes. I told her, you'll only be served if you show up at the hotel. No hotel, no papers. However, our marriage has been greatly strained, so here's what needs to happen. I explained that first, she'd have to call Clark in my presence. I wanted to hear her tell him that everything was off. Then, she'd disable and delete your personal email, for his sake. Afterward, you'll contact your boss and tell him about S actions, asking him to be barred from your office. Then, we'll arrange for counseling. We need to understand why you were drawn to this, why you thought I'd agree, and how we can rebuild trust. I finished just as I finished her phone call. I heard Clark ask where she was. He said he was waiting for her at reception and couldn't wait any longer. She took a deep breath and said something along the lines of, Alistair, I'm back home with Lou. Something he did shook me to my core. If I go with you, my marriage will be destroyed. I'm sorry, you're not worth it. That's why I'm not going. She said his rage was like nothing she'd ever seen. You're a foolish cow. Do you know how much effort, time, and money I've invested in you? And now you're leaving when the weakling behaves like an offended child. You're just a powerhouse. Screw you, he spat out before hanging up. Ruby saw him for who he truly was, a slime ball. She deactivated it. It took longer than we thought to delete the mailbox, but we got it done within an hour. When we finished, the HR manager, Mike Woods, came to our door. He said, Ruby, we know what happened today. We're not happy about it, but we want to give you a chance to keep your job. Now, please tell me what happened. She took a tissue to dab her eye before speaking. As you know, about 3 months ago our account was signed to a new AM Metal sales agent, Alistair Clark. I previously managed this account and he used to come to me almost daily. Initially, I didn't notice, but he started flirting with me and complimenting my attire and hairstyle. And even my smile was enough for him. Gradually, he began commenting on my physique, discussing my figure and appearance. I fell for it and started dressing more provocatively. He sent gifts like flowers and chocolates, then invited me to dinner. I foolishly accepted, and during the dinner, he asked personal questions about my life, my husband, and eventually my bedroom life. He started saying my husband wasn't good enough for me. It was a slow process, wearing me down bit by bit. Then he proposed a weekend getaway, but luckily Lou stepped in. He handed me a letter saying he was divorcing me, which made me realize what was going on. I told Alistair I wasn't going and that Lou and I were planning to save our marriage. I was planning to report the incident formally, so I'm glad you're here. Woods glanced at the CEO, who nodded before addressing Ruby. Ruby, we appreciate your honesty. Yes, it was a significant error, and you're fortunate to retain your job. We have issues with the quality of our metal products, so we'll be closing his account. Consequently, Clark will be. You've been permanently removed from the office, so there won't be any further action taken against you. However, if anything similar happens again, you'll be dismissed. Is that clear? Ruby nodded meekly. They bid us farewell and departed. After they left, we had lunch and then began searching for a consultant. Fortunately, locating one proved relatively simple. I gave them a call and made an appointment. The consultant said they could meet us the next day, which was Saturday. We set a time and met. We looked at each other for about 10 seconds, then I took Ruby's hand and led her to bed. We had sex later. We went to bed and I fell asleep with my head on her chest. I woke up around 5:00 a.m. We shared a tender moment of intimacy, perhaps the first since she met Clark. The consultations were productive. Ruby realized that Clark had exploited her fear of our lives becoming dull and routine. She also realized that she had unwittingly provided him with the information he needed to manipulate her. I came to understand that for him it was all just a game. I grew to appreciate the richness of our life together. We didn't require anyone else to guide us. The consultations lasted 3 months. For years later, we're blissfully happy, and Ruby is expecting our first child. As for Mr. Clark, he had a nasty fall at our local shopping center while descending the stairs to the car park. The circumstances surrounding the incident are a mystery, but there were at least 5 husbands at the mall that day who were pretty annoyed. We were all dressed in black and wearing baseball caps. We gathered at the scene and sat down, making it impossible to tell who was there and who wasn't. The police tried to separate us, but none of us said anything. I'm sure one of us was responsible. I swear.